She had 4 minutes because that is what the sign-up sheet gives you, and she used 3 minutes and 40 seconds of them, and I have never in my life watched anyone use time better. I was sitting in the 4th row of a gymnasium that smelled like floor wax and cold coffee, wearing the blazer I keep for parent conferences, and I did not know I was the subject of the item until she said my name. My concern tonight is about MS. Doherty, Whitney Ardaugh said, and every head in that gym turned about 11 degrees. She did not shout. That is the first thing I want you to understand about her, because if you are picturing a woman screaming at a microphone, you are picturing somebody I could have survived. Whitney Ardaugh has the voice of a person reading a bedtime story to a child she loves. She held a single sheet of paper with both hands, the way you hold something that is heavier than paper. She said she did not want to be there. She said she had gone back and forth for 2 weeks. She said she was a mother first, and that she hoped every parent in the room would understand that she was only doing what any of them would do. Then she read out a text message. It was 11 words long, and it had been sent from my school account at 9:41 on a Tuesday night to a 13-year-old boy, and I am not going to repeat it here, because I have had to say it out loud 11 times in rooms with lawyers in them, and I have decided that I do not have to say it again in my own account of my own life. It was not obscene. That is what made it so effective. If it had been obscene, half that gym would have decided instantly that it was fake, because obscene is a thing people know how to disbelieve. It was worse than obscene. It was warm. It was the kind of thing a teacher might say to a struggling kid at the end of a bad week, tilted about 15 degrees, so that a person hearing it at a school board meeting in a gymnasium would feel something crawl across the back of their neck. She finished reading. She put the paper down. She said, "I don't know what to think. I really don't. I just know I can't be the only one who saw this and said nothing." And then Whitney Ardaugh sat down, and the board president said, "Thank you for your comments," and moved to the next item on the agenda, which was a bid for gymnasium roof repair. That is how it happened. In 4 minutes between the approval of the previous minutes and a roof. I have been a teacher for 14 years. 8th grade science, at a school 4 miles from the house I grew up in a town of 19,000 people where I have bought my groceries my whole life. You should know a few things about me before the rest of it. I am 38. I have a daughter, Ada, who was 11 that year and who is the funniest person I have ever met, and a husband, Sam, who runs a 2-man HVAC business and who has never once in 14 years made me feel like my job was small. I am good at what I do. I am going to say that plainly once and then not keep saying it. I have twice been the district's Teacher of the Year, which is a thing that means nothing and is voted on by adults, and I have also had 11 former students come back on their own time to sit in my classroom after school and tell me things they could not tell anyone else, which is a thing that means everything and is voted on by nobody. I am also the person in that building who understood the technology, which is the entire reason this story has an ending. Not because I am some kind of genius. Because in 2019, our district rolled out one-to-one devices and a communications platform, and every teacher over 50 was terrified of it, and the district offered a $400 stipend to anyone who would become a building technology liaison, and I had a daughter starting kindergarten, and $400 was a car payment. So for 6 years, I have been the person who sets up accounts. I have run the training. I have written the acceptable use guidance for our building. I know what that platform logs, and I know how long it keeps it, and I know the specific, deeply boring fact that turned out to matter more than anything else in this story, which I will get to. Whitney Ardaugh did not know any of that about me. She knew I was a science teacher who had given her son a 58. Let me go back 4 weeks, to the actual beginning, which was a Thursday in October and a grade. Beckett Ardaugh was in my 4th period. 13 years old, tall for it, with the loose-limbed apologetic posture of a kid who grew 6 inches in a year and has not been told it is allowed. He was failing, not because he could not do it, because he was not doing it, which is a different problem and usually a louder one. I want to describe him carefully, because everything that happened afterward turns on him, and I refuse to make him a plot device. Beckett was funny in a very dry way that most adults missed. He drew, constantly, in the margins of everything, small, precise, mechanical drawings of things that did not exist. He was polite in the specific, over-rehearsed way that tells you a kid has been corrected about his manners a great deal. And he had, that autumn, the thing I have learned to watch for over 14 years, which is not sadness and is not anger. It is flatness. A kid who is normally at a 6 drops to a 2 and stays there, and everybody says he is being lazy. I emailed home 3 times in September. I got responses from Whitney within 11 minutes each time, which should have told me something and did not. The third response said, "We are on this. He is grounded from everything until this is fixed. Please send me his missing work list every Friday, and I will make sure it is done." And it was done, every Friday, immaculately, in handwriting that was Beckett's and in sentences that were not. In the second week of October, I gave a unit test. Beckett got a 58. It was, and I say this as somebody who has read 40,000 of these, an honest 58. He knew about half of it. Whitney requested a conference. We sat in my classroom on a Thursday after school, in the chairs that are too small for adults, and she was warm and organized and had printed out the online gradebook with 3 items highlighted. And 40 minutes in, she said, "So what I'm hearing is there's some flexibility on the test." There isn't, no. But you said he understood the material. I said he understands about half of it, and I'd like to keep working with him. She smiled at me. I want to record that smile because I did not read it correctly at the time. It was not hostile. It was the look of a person who has hit an unexpected surface and is now finding out what it is made of. "MS, Doherty," she said. "Can I be honest? Beckett has an application in for the STEM magnet in the spring. A C in 8th grade science ends that, so this isn't really about one test." I understand. Do you? Still perfectly pleasant. Because I think if you understood, you'd find a way to be a little more flexible about a 13-year-old's entire future. And I said the sentence that cost me my career, and I have gone over it 1,100 times, and I would say it again. I said, "Mrs. Ardaugh, I'm not going to change a grade he didn't earn. But I'll stay after school with him twice a week for as long as he wants, for free, starting Monday." She gathered her printouts and thanked me for my time and shook my hand. Beckett came Monday, and Wednesday, and the Monday after that. 6 sessions in 3 weeks, and by the 3rd one he was talking, and by the 5th one he had shown me the drawings, and on the 6th one, which was the 4th of November, he asked me a question that I did not think about again until February. He said, "MS, oh, if somebody did something and they didn't mean it to get big, is there a point where it's too late to say?" And I said what you say. I said it is basically never too late, and that things feel enormous at 13 that turn out to be survivable, and that if he wanted to tell me something he could. And he said, "No, it's not me. It's for a thing I'm writing." 11 days later, the screenshot went around the school. It moved through 800 students in about 90 minutes, which I am told is slow by current standards. I found out at 10:20 in the morning when a girl in my second period, Marisol, put her hand up and asked to go to the bathroom and then did not go to the bathroom, and instead stood in the hallway outside my door and cried. And when I went out, she said, "MS, oh, somebody's saying a really bad thing about you." By noon, I was in the principal's office. Doug Petrosian has been my principal for 9 years, and I would have said, on the 10th of November, that he was a friend. He had a printout on his desk, face down, which is a thing people do when they have decided to be gentle with you, and it is the most frightening object in the world. He turned it over. It was a screenshot of a message thread, my name and photo at the top from the school platform, my account. One message sent 9:41 p.m. Tuesday the 4th of November. I looked at it for a long time. "Frankie," Doug said, "I have to ask you directly." "I didn't send that." "Okay." "Doug, I didn't send that." "I hear you," he said, and here is the thing about that sentence, which I had used myself perhaps 2,000 times with students and never once understood until it was pointed at me. "I hear you" is what a person says when they have not decided whether to believe you and are buying time. He told me the district had been notified. He told me there would be an investigation, that it was not a suspension, that I was being placed on administrative leave with pay effective immediately, which is not a punishment, it is a precaution, and that I should go home now and not contact any student or family. I said, "Can I get my grade book?" And Doug Petrosian said, "I'll have somebody bring your things out to you." That is the sentence. That is the exact moment, if you want one. 14 years, and a man I have eaten lunch with 400 times would not let me walk back into my own classroom to pick up a binder. I have skipped over the 6 after-school sessions in about 4 sentences, and that is dishonest, because they are the reason all of it happened, and because they are the only part of that whole year I would live again. They were Mondays and Wednesdays, 3, 10 to about 4, 00 in room 214, door open, window clear. The first one was terrible. He sat in the second row with his hood up and answered in syllables, and I did 50 minutes of talking at a boy who did not want to be there, and at the end I said, "Same time Wednesday," and he shrugged, and I genuinely thought that was the end of it. He came Wednesday. The second one, I gave up on the periodic table for a while and asked him what the drawings were. He had been doing them in the margin of everything since September. I had 200 of them, technically, because they were on the back of every worksheet he had ever handed in. Little precise mechanical assemblies, gears and linkages and armatures, drawn with the kind of attention that you cannot fake and cannot teach. He said, "They're nothing." "They're not nothing. They're really good. What are they?" And Beckett Ardaw said, "They're machines that don't work." I said, "What do you mean they don't work?" "They can't." He turned the page around, like this one. "The gear ratio's wrong on purpose, so if you built it, it'd just grind. They all do something like that. That's the point of them." I sat there and looked at a 13-year-old's drawing of a machine designed to fail. I said, "Why do you draw machines that don't work?" He said, "Because then it's not my fault when they don't." I want to be very careful here, because a version of this account makes me the teacher who saw everything, and I did not. I did not think, this child is in trouble. I thought, this is a funny, sad, extremely bright kid who is under too much pressure, which described about 9 kids in my 4th period, and I filed it where I file those, which is a list I keep and go through on Fridays. I did the ordinary things. I told the counselor he was flat, which is the word we use, and she said she would check in, and she did once, and he said he was fine, which is what they say. What I did not do is call home about it, because the last 3 times I called home about anything the answer came back in 11 minutes, and it was a missing work spreadsheet, and I had already learned that calling that house did not produce help for Beckett. It produced pressure on Beckett. I made that calculation deliberately in October, and I have gone over it 1,000 times since. Not calling was the right call, and it was also the reason nobody in a position to act ever found out. Both of those are true, and I have stopped trying to resolve them. By the 4th session, he talked the whole time. Not about anything. That is the thing people who do not work with teenagers do not understand. He talked about a video game and a friend called Micah, and whether it is possible to be allergic to cinnamon, and I did about 11 minutes of actual science with him in 50, and it was the most productive session we had, because at the end of it he took his hood down. The 5th one, he asked about my daughter, and I told him a story about Ada at 8 losing a spelling bee on the word buoyant and being furious for 3 days, and he laughed so hard he had to put his head on the desk. And then he said, out of nowhere, still looking at the desk, was she in trouble? For losing. I said, for losing a spelling bee. Yeah. Beckett, no. Nobody's in trouble for losing a spelling bee. He said, okay, and picked his pencil back up, and I have thought about that exchange more than almost anything else in this story, because I heard it, I registered it, I understood what it meant, and I did nothing, because there was nothing to do with it. There is no form for a boy who asks whether losing is punishable. There is no box on the referral. The 6th session was the 4th of November, and it was the last one, and it was 6 hours before he made the screenshot. We did about half an hour on the periodic table, and he actually got it, the thing about the columns, and he did that quick surprised sit-up that kids do when something lands, and said, oh, that's why, and I said, that's why, and we sat there quite pleased with ourselves. Then he asked the question, The one about whether there is a point where it is too late to say a thing. I have replayed my answer approximately 11,000 times. I said it is basically never too late. I said things feel enormous at 13 and turn out to be survivable. I said if he wanted to tell me something, he could. He said it was for a thing he was writing. And here is what I did next, and it is the failure I actually carry, and it is not the one anybody would guess. I let it go. I did not say, that is a strange question for a story. I did not say, if it were not for a thing you were writing, is there something? I said the reassuring adult sentence, and he gave me the exit line, and I took the exit line because it was 4:00 on a Tuesday and I had a daughter to pick up and 41 lab reports in my bag, and because taking the exit line is what you do about 90 times a day in that job, or you would never get out of the building. 6 hours later, he sat in a kitchen and had a fight with his mother about being ordinary, and then he made a picture of a message I never sent. I am not saying I could have stopped it. A different answer from me at 3:58 on a Tuesday probably changes nothing at all. I know that. Sam has said it to me perhaps 200 times, and Sam is right. But he asked. That is the thing. In the entire chain of adults in that boy's life that autumn, he chose one person to ask, and it was me. And he asked as directly as a 13-year-old is capable of asking. And I gave him a good, kind, professionally correct non-answer and went to get my car keys. There is one more thing about those 6 sessions, and then I will get back to the story. In the 4th month of my leave, sometime in early February, Sam found me in the kitchen at 1 a.m. with the folder of Beckett's old worksheets that I had, technically, illegally, taken home in my bag on the 7th of November, 3 days before any of it started, because I was going to scan the drawings and make him a little printed collection for the end of the semester. That was going to be my thing. That was the whole plan. Print them, put them in a cheap folder, hand it to him in December and say, these are good, somebody should tell you they are good. I had 40 of them on the table, and I was in the middle of it at 1 a.m, while under investigation for sending that child an inappropriate message. Sam stood in the doorway and looked at what I was doing, and he did not say be careful, and he did not say what if somebody sees that, although both of those were true and both of those were things I would have said if it had been him. He said, are you going to still give it to him? And I said, I don't know. And he said, okay, and went to bed. I never did give it to him. It is in the garage, on the shelf, next to a 4-foot timeline on the back of a roll of wrapping paper, in a house in a town of 19,000 people, and I do not know what I am waiting for, and I am aware that he is 19, and it is not mine to spend is a sentence I have used to avoid deciding. I sat in my car in the staff lot for 40 minutes because I could not remember how to drive. That is not a figure of speech. I got in, and I put my hands on the wheel, and my brain produced nothing at all, the way a screen goes blank. At some point, Rosalie from the front office came out and stood by my window and did not say anything and put her hand flat on the glass, and then went back inside, and I have never mentioned it to her, and I never will, and I think about it constantly. When I got home, I did not tell Sam. He came in at 6 with the smell of somebody else's basement on him, and I said the words and watched his face do a thing I had never seen it do, and then he said, okay. Okay. Right, 3 times, and went and stood in the garage for 11 minutes. He came back in and said, who's got your password? Nobody. Frankie. Nobody, Sam. It's not written down. It's not saved anywhere. It's not the same as any other password I use. He nodded slowly. Then he said the thing that turned out to be the most useful sentence anybody said to me in the 1st month. Then they didn't need your password, he said. They needed your account. That's not the same thing, and I bet you know the difference better than anybody in that building. Here is the boring, technical fact I promised you, and I am going to explain it once properly because everything hangs on it. Our district uses a communications platform where every message is logged server-side. Not on the phone, not on the laptop. On a server, in a data center in another state, along with metadata that the sender never sees and cannot alter. For every message that log holds. The account, the timestamp to the second, the device identifier, the IP address, the client type, and a session identifier. A screenshot has none of that. A screenshot is a picture. Anybody with a phone and 11 minutes can make one that is indistinguishable from a real one, and I have watched 14-year-olds do exactly that as a joke about each other since 2019. So on the 10th of November, there were only two possibilities. Either a message with that text existed in the server log at 9:41 p.m. on the 4th of November, sent from my account. Or there was no such record, and what existed was a picture of something that had never happened. Those are not close to each other. There is no ambiguity between them. One database query settles it forever. I knew that on day one. I knew it sitting in the parking lot. And I want you to hold on to the fact that I knew it, because the next 4 months are about what happens when you are the only person who understands that a question has an answer, and nobody with the power to ask it wants to. I wrote to Doug that night. Polite short, I said, the platform retains server side logs including device ID and IP. Please request the log for my account for the 4th of November. If the message exists, it will be there. If it does not exist, that is dispositive. He wrote back the next morning, Frankie, I've forwarded your note to district. This is out of my hands now, and I have been advised not to discuss the substance with you. Take care of yourself. Out of my hands. I have thought a great deal about that phrase. Every single person in this story said a version of it, and every one of them was telling the truth. And the total of all those people telling the truth was that a thing everyone could see was wrong went on happening for 4 months. The district's HR director, a man named Curtis Akanjo, who I had met twice, called me on the 12th. He was careful and decent and told me the process. An external investigator interviews, a report, then a determination. 6 to 8 weeks. He said I should not contact witnesses. He said twice that no conclusion had been reached. I asked about the server logs. There was a pause, and then he said, the investigator will determine what evidence is relevant. Mr. Akanjo, I'm the building tech liaison. I wrote our acceptable use guidance. That log has a device identifier on it. It will show whether the message was sent from my phone. I understand that you have technical familiarity, he said, and something in his voice changed, and I did not understand what it was until much later. That's actually something the investigator will want to explore. I sat with the phone in my hand after he hung up. My technical familiarity was not going to be treated as expertise. It was going to be treated as capability. I was not the person who could prove it did not happen. I was the person who would have known how to make it happen and cover it up. That is what happens to competence when it walks into a room where somebody has already decided something. The town took 9 days. I want to describe it accurately because everybody who has not been through it imagines a mob, and it is not a mob. It is worse and quieter than that. It is that on the 14th of November I went to the grocery store, and a woman I have known since I was 9, who taught my Sunday school, saw me at the end of the cereal aisle and turned her cart around. It is that our neighbor Deb, who has borrowed our ladder every spring for 6 years, stopped waving. It is that a man in a truck outside the hardware store said something to me through his window that I am not going to write down, and drove off, and I stood on the pavement holding a bag of furnace filters. It is that the group chat for Ada's travel soccer went quiet for 2 days and then reconstituted itself without me in it, and nobody said a word about it. And I found out because Ada asked me why we did not know about the carpool change. And it is that about 11 people, over those 9 days, sent me messages saying some version of, I don't believe it for a second, I've known you 20 years. Every single one of those messages was private. Not one of those 11 people said it out loud anywhere. I do not blame them. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easier not to be. I have thought about what I would have done in 2019 if a teacher I liked had a screenshot going around, and I am not confident I would have said anything either. That is what makes it work. It is not built on cruelty. It runs on 11 decent people, each privately deciding that this is not the hill. Ada was 11. She got it worst on the bus and in the 3rd week when somebody made a page. It was up for 4 days. It had my face on it. She stopped eating breakfast. She started saying her stomach hurt at 6:40 every morning, which is a thing my daughter has never once done in her life. And I let her stay home twice, and then Sam and I sat on the edge of her bed and had the conversation you never planned for. Here is what my daughter said to me, at 11 years old, sitting cross-legged with a blanket over her knees. "Mom, if you just say you did it, does it stop? I want to be very careful here." She did not think I had done it. She was not accusing me. She was doing arithmetic, the way children do, about the fastest route out of pain, and she had worked out correctly that a confession ends a thing and a denial extends it. I said it might stop, and then it would be true forever. She thought about it and said, "That's worse," and I said yes, and she nodded and put her head on my shoulder, and that was the whole conversation, and I have never been more frightened in my life than I was in that 4 seconds before she answered. I got a lawyer in the 4th week, and it was the union's lawyer, and she was overloaded and competent and completely realistic. Her name was Bernice Ashworth, and she had 11 other members in trouble that month, and she told me the truth in the first meeting, which I have come to see as a kindness even though it landed like a brick. "You will probably not be fired," she said. "That is the good news, and I want you to hold on to it. Districts almost never fire in a case like this because it is expensive and there is a union and the evidence is thin. So what happens? You are on leave until the investigation concludes. The report finds it unsubstantiated but notes concerns because investigators hate to write a clean exoneration. And then, sometime in the spring, somebody from the district calls you and suggests, very warmly, that given everything, a fresh start at another building might be best for everyone." I stared at her. "They move me." "They move you," Bernice said, "and you will want to take it, because by then you will have been out for 5 months and you will be so tired that a new building will sound like mercy. And that is the outcome in about 80% of these. And the message, the actual message, whether it exists." Bernice Ashworth looked at me for a moment with real sympathy. "Frances," she said, "nobody is going to prove it either way, and that is what everyone in that building is quietly counting on. An unresolved allegation lets everybody keep their position. The parent stays angry, the district stays cautious, the principal stays neutral, and you go to another school. Nobody has to be wrong." And that, right there, is the thing I did not understand until that moment and have never stopped understanding since. I had spent 4 weeks thinking I was in a fight about the truth. I was not. Everyone around me had already found a way to survive without the truth, and the truth was, for every single one of them, the most expensive possible outcome. Nobody tells you about the money. Administrative leave with pay sounds like a holiday, and it is technically accurate, and it is one of the great lies of the whole arrangement. I was paid. That part is true. What stopped was everything else, and I had not understood how much of our life ran on the everything else. I coached the Science Olympiad team, which is a stipend. Gone, obviously, because I could not be near students. I taught 2 sections of summer credit recovery every June and July, which was $4,000, and which paid for Ada's braces on a schedule I had worked out 18 months in advance, and in the 3rd week of leave I had to call the orthodontist and start a sentence with something's come up at work. And I tutored. Privately, 4 kids a week at $40 an hour since 2018 for families who found me by word of mouth. 3 of the 4 canceled in the 2nd week of November. The 4th, a mother named Delphine whose son I had worked with for 2 years, did not cancel and did not come, which is somehow worse. And after 2 weeks I texted her and said I understood completely and released her from the arrangement. And she wrote back, "Thank you so much for understanding." And that was the end of $640 a month. And then there was Sam. My husband installs and services heating and air in a county of 40,000 people. His entire business is word of mouth and repeat customers, and a very large fraction of his customers are people who have known us both since high school. November and December are his season. That is when a furnace dies at 11 at night and somebody who has your number calls it. He did $412 of work in December. In an ordinary December, he does 11 or 12,000. He did not tell me for 3 weeks. I found out because I opened the wrong window on the laptop and saw the job log, and I stood there and looked at a page of white space with 4 entries on it. When I asked him about it, he did the thing he does where he answers a question you did not ask. He said, "It's a slow one." "Sam, people are careful in a small town," he said. "It's not personal. It is completely personal." And my husband, who is not a man who says a great deal, put down what he was holding and said, "Yeah, okay, it is." 2 guys told me straight out. One said he didn't want the wife hearing about it, and one said he wasn't going to have that conversation with me and he was sorry. He picked his tools back up. "I'm not telling you that so you'll feel bad," he said. "I'm telling you because you asked, and I'm not going to lie to you for 4 months. But Frankie, I want it on the record right now, in November. I would rather lose the business than have you say a thing you didn't do. So don't do the arithmetic. I've already done the arithmetic and it doesn't change anything." I got a job in the 2nd week of January. I have never told anybody outside the family this, including Bernice, and I am not sure why I am putting it in now, except that it is true, and this is supposed to be an account of what actually happened. I worked at a plant nursery 2 towns over, 28 hours a week, at $14 an hour, mostly in an unheated polytunnel repotting seedlings, from the 7th of January until the 15th of February. I did not need to. I was on paid leave. Sam and I were not in danger. I took it because I had been in my house for 8 weeks and had started doing a thing where I would stand in the kitchen at 10:20 in the morning, which is when I would have been teaching 2nd period, and just stand there. Not crying, standing. The nursery was run by a woman named Corinne, who did not ask me a single question about myself, and paid in cash on Fridays, and let me listen to whatever I wanted in the poly tunnel. And for 5.5 weeks, I put small plants into slightly bigger pots and thought about absolutely nothing. I have since talked to a therapist about that period, and she used a phrase I liked, which was that I had gone and found somewhere to be competent. That is exactly it. That is precisely what it was. I had spent 14 years being extremely good at a specific thing in a specific room, and I had been told I could not enter the room, and something in me needed to go be reliably good at something with my hands where nobody was assessing whether I was the kind of person who does that. 1,200 seedlings. Every one of them lived. I know because I asked Corinne in June and she said, "Course they did," like it was a stupid question. The nights were the actual thing, and I am going to describe one properly, because the whole 4 months has a texture that gets lost when you summarize. It is the 11th of January, about 2 in the morning. Sam is asleep. I am at the kitchen table. I have 3 tabs open. One is the district's policy manual. One is the platform vendor's public documentation on data retention, which I have now read 11 times, including a section on API access that I do not fully understand and keep going back to in case there is something in it. The third is a search for Whitney Ardaw's name, which I have run about 40 times, and which returns the same 11 results it returned yesterday. I have a legal pad. On it I have written in a column, 4/Nov 9:41 p.m., 10/Nov leave, 11 dec request, 2 Feb expiry. And underneath, in a different pen, because I wrote it a different night, who else could see my account? And underneath that, from a third night, nobody. It's not about the password. I make tea and do not drink it. At some point, I go and stand in the doorway of Ada's room, which I have not done since she was 4, and listen to her breathe, and then I go back to the table. I am not doing anything. That is the point. There is nothing to do. Every actual action available to me takes 11 minutes, and I have already taken all of them, and what is left is 19 hours a day of being a person about whom a question is open. That is the part that does the damage, not the accusation, the suspension of it. A person can survive being called a thing. What eats you is being a question that has not been answered for 81 days in a town where everybody knows the question. At 2:40, I write one more line on the pad, and it is the only genuinely useful thing I produce in that entire fortnight, and it is not a plan or a legal theory. It is. They are not going to ask. Stop waiting for them to ask. 27 days later, I filed the records request. The investigator was a retired assistant superintendent named Gordon Feld who did this work on contract, and I met him twice, in a conference room at the district office with Bernice beside me. He was not a villain. I want to keep saying that about people in this story because it is the actual shape of it. He was 66 and thorough, and he had a legal pad, and he asked me 140 questions across 2 sessions. He asked what time I go to bed. He asked whether my phone has a passcode, and whether Sam knows it, and whether Ada knows it. He asked whether I had ever been alone with Beckett Ardaugh in a room with the door closed. And I said no, never. The door has a window and district policy is the window stays clear. And he wrote that down and then asked it again in a different way 11 minutes later, which is a technique. And I understood it was a technique and it worked anyway, because the second time I heard my own voice go defensive, and I thought, that is what guilt sounds like. At the end of the second session, I asked him directly about the server log. Gordon Feld put down his pen and said, "I've requested the platform records." Something in my chest let go. "But I want to manage your expectations," he said. "I'm told there's a retention question." A retention question. The district's contract tier retains detailed message metadata for 90 days. The incident is dated the 4th of November. Depending on when the request is processed, and it goes through the vendor's legal channel, not through the district, we may be at the edge of that window. I did the arithmetic in my head in about a second and a half, because I had done it 40 times already. 90 days from the 4th of November is the 2nd of February. It was the 11th of December. "That's 7 weeks," I said. "That's plenty of time." "It should be," Gordon Feld said. "These requests can be slow. I've submitted it." I want to lay out what that 90-day window did to me, because it is the engine of the whole middle of this thing. Everybody else in the process was working on a timescale of months. Investigations take 6 to 8 weeks, hearings get scheduled, holidays intervene, people are on vacation. That is the normal metabolism of a school district, and there is nothing sinister about it. But there was a clock running on the only piece of evidence that could ever settle it. And after the 2nd of February, the answer would not exist anywhere in the world. Not lost, not hidden, deleted in the ordinary course by a vendor's automated retention policy because nobody had paid for the higher tier. And the terrible symmetry of it, which I could not stop thinking about at 3 in the morning, was this: if the log vanished, everyone got what they needed. The district got an unresolved allegation and a quiet transfer. Whitney Ardaugh got a permanent cloud over the woman who would not change her son's grade. And I got to spend the rest of my life being a person that some people in a town of 19,000 were not sure about. I did not think anybody was deliberately running out the clock. I still do not think that, mostly. But I noticed that not one single person in the process was in a hurry, and that I was the only one who knew there was a reason to be. On the 17th of December, Rosalie Benavides called my cell from her own phone in the parking lot of a pharmacy. She is the front office manager. She has been at that school for 26 years. She is the person who actually runs the building and everybody knows it. "I'm not supposed to be calling you," she said. "Then don't." "I know." A long pause. "Frankie, do you remember Adeora N. Duckwey?" The name came up out of somewhere far back. 6th grade math. She was only here a year. She left in, 2022? March of 2022, Rosalie said. She resigned in March of 2022, and she did not have another job to go to, and she had a 2-year-old. The pharmacy parking lot was audible around her. A car door, someone's radio. Why did she resign, Rosalie? There was a complaint, Rosalie said. It never went anywhere. It went away completely, actually, which at the time I thought was good. Another pause. The parent who made it was Whitney Ardaugh. Her daughter Sloane was in Adeora's class. I sat down on my own stairs. "That's all I know," Rosalie said. "I'm not going to say anything else, and I'm going to say I never called you, and I'm sorry, and I have to go." Adeora N. Duckwey lives 90 minutes north now and teaches at a charter school and did not want to talk to me. That is not a dramatic sentence. She was not cold about it. I found her, and I wrote to her, and she wrote back a very kind, very final email that said she was glad to hear from me, that she was sorry for what I was going through, and that she had spent 4 years putting 2022 down and was not going to pick it back up, and she hoped I understood. I understood completely. I wrote back and said so, and thanked her, and told her I would not contact her again, and I did not. 2 weeks later, on New Year's Day, she called me. She talked for an hour and 11 minutes. The complaint in 2022 was different in its details and identical in its architecture. Adeora had declined to move a 6th grader into an advanced math track mid-year. 6 weeks later, there was an allegation about something Adeora had supposedly said to a student in a hallway. There was no recording, no screenshot, nothing. It was a report of a report. The district investigated. It was unsubstantiated. And then a very kind man from HR called Adeora and suggested that given everything, a fresh start might be best for everyone. And by then it was March, and she had been out for 11 weeks, and she was so tired that it sounded like mercy. She resigned instead of transferring, because she could not face walking into another building in the same district, knowing that a file existed. "Do you know what I keep thinking about?" she said near the end. "It worked so well the first time. It cost her nothing. It cost me my whole life for 2 years, and it cost her nothing at all, so of course she did it again." And then Adeora Ndukwi said, "Frances, do not do what I did." "What did you do?" "I was reasonable," she said. "I was so reasonable. I did everything through the proper channel, and I waited my turn, and I did not make anybody uncomfortable, because I thought that if I behaved well enough they would see that I was the kind of person who could not have done it." Her voice was completely level. "They are not looking at what kind of person you are. They are looking for the cheapest way to close a file. Be the expensive option. Be the expensive option." I wrote it on a sticky note and put it on the fridge, and Sam looked at it and said nothing. Here is what it meant in practice, and it took me 11 days to work out, sitting at my kitchen table with the district's own policy manual, which is public, which anybody can download, which I had helped write 2 sections of in 2021. I had been treating this as an investigation I was the subject of. In that frame, I had no moves. I could answer questions and wait. But I was also, still, an employee of that district with rights under a collective bargaining agreement, and a resident of that town, and a parent of a child in that district, and the co-author of the building's acceptable use guidance. Each of those is a different door, and each door has a different lock. So on the 7th of January, I stopped writing letters as an accused teacher. I filed a public records request. Not about me. That was the whole trick, and Bernice Ashworth actually laughed out loud when I explained it, one short, surprised bark of a laugh, and then said, "Oh, that's good." A request from me about my own investigation would be denied as an active personnel matter. Fine. Instead, I requested, as a member of the public, which anyone in that town could have done at any time, all communications between the district administration and the platform vendor regarding data retention tier pricing, and any records requests submitted in the preceding 6 months. Nothing about me, nothing about Beckett, nothing confidential. Just, what did you ask the vendor for, and when did you ask? The law gave them 10 business days. I drove up to see Adeora Ndukwi on the 11th of January, which was a Saturday, 4 days after we spoke on New Year's Day. She had said everything on the phone that she was going to say, and she said so. And then at the end she said, "If you're ever up this way," which is a thing people say to close a conversation, and I chose to interpret it literally, and I texted her the next morning and asked if I could buy her a coffee, and she said yes. 90 minutes north. A different county, a bigger town, a charter school in a converted grocery store. She is about 45, very contained, with an accent that goes Nigerian at the ends of sentences when she is tired. And she talked to me for 3 hours in a coffee place with a broken radiator. And I want to set down what she told me because she is the reason I did the only intelligent things I did. The thing that had happened to her was not identical. I had been assuming it was, and it was not, and the differences turned out to matter more than the similarities. In 2022, there was no artifact. Nothing was fabricated because nothing needed to be. A sixth grader reported to her mother that Ms. Ndukwi had said something to another student in a hallway. The other student did not remember it. Nobody else heard it. There was no message, no screenshot, no recording. That is worse, Adeora said. You think an object is worse. An object can be examined. A rumor cannot be examined, and therefore it cannot be disproved, and therefore it never ends. Yours has an end. It has a database. I have envied you that since you called me. She was completely matter-of-fact about it. And the second thing, she said, I was new. 11 months in a building. Nobody there had 20 years of knowing me. You have 14 years and a Sunday school teacher who turned her cart around, and you feel that as betrayal, and it is also a resource. 11 people wrote to you privately. Nobody wrote to me at all. Nobody. 2 people, she said. One of them was Rosalie Benavides. I asked her the question I had driven 90 minutes to ask, which was what she would do differently. She thought about it properly. She did not have a speech ready, which somehow made it land harder. 3 things, she said eventually. The first one is what I told you on the telephone. I was reasonable. I waited for the process. The process is not a machine for finding the truth. It is a machine for producing a document that allows an institution to stop thinking about you. Once I understood that, it was March and I had resigned. The second, I treated it as private. She turned her cup. I was ashamed. That is what nobody says. You are innocent and you are ashamed anyway, and the shame makes you quiet, and the quiet is read as an admission. I told 4 people, 4 in 11 weeks. I did not tell my own mother until it was over. I sat with that one for a while, because I had told about 11 people, and it had felt like a great many, and it was 11 out of a life. And the third thing, Adeora said, is the one I actually think about. She put the cup down. I never asked what it would take for me to stay. Not once. I spent 11 weeks trying to prove I did not do it, and when the report came back unsubstantiated and the man from HR called me about a fresh start, I said no and I resigned, and I felt principled about it for about a year. Her mouth went flat. But I never said, all right, what would I need in order to walk back into that building? I never made anybody tell me. I assumed there was nothing and I left. And I have wondered ever since whether if I had asked, somebody would have had to answer. She asked about Beckett. Not by name. I had not given her the name and she had not asked for it. She said, the child. Do you think the child knows something? I think the child knows everything. Yes, she nodded slowly. In mine it was a girl and she was 11 and I have always believed she did not mean any of it. She said a thing to her mother about a teacher because it got her out of a bad evening about a test result. That is all. 11 years old. And then the machine started and there was no way for an 11-year-old to stop it, and I do not blame her and I have never blamed her, and I will say to you now what I have never said to anybody. She looked at me. I hope she does not remember, Adeora said. Because if she remembers, she is 21 now, and she has been carrying for 10 years the knowledge that she ended a woman's career with a sentence at a kitchen table, and there is nothing I can do about that from here. Nobody thinks about that part. Everybody thinks about the parent and the teacher. Nobody thinks about what it does to the child to find out what they set off. I drove 90 minutes home in the dark thinking about a boy who had asked me whether there is a point where it is too late to say. There was a third teacher. I want to include her briefly because I found her and then did nothing with her, and the reason I did nothing is part of the story. Rosalie had mentioned, obliquely, in a second phone call from a different parking lot, that there had been a thing in 2019 as well, before the district changed the complaint form. I found her through the board minutes, which are public going back 12 years and which nobody reads. An elementary music teacher. A complaint in the spring of 2019 that went nowhere, and a resignation the following September that had nothing formally to do with it. I found her on a professional networking site. She lives in another state now and teaches privately. I wrote the message. It was 4 paragraphs. I explained who I was and what had happened to me and what I had learned about 2022 and asked whether she would be willing to talk. I did not send it. I have thought about why for 2 years. Some of it was Bernice, who had told me flatly that assembling a pattern of complaints by a private citizen and presenting it as a case was exactly how a wronged person becomes a problem person. Some of it was that I had 2 accounts already and did not need a third. But the real reason is that I read my own message back, in the drafts folder, at 11 at night in January, and I heard the tone of it, and the tone was, "Hello, I have found you. I need you to relive the worst year of your life so that I can use it." Adeora had chosen to call me. That is completely different. She had 4 days to decide, and she decided. This woman had put an entire state between herself and 2019, and I was about to arrive in her inbox on a Tuesday night and undo that for me. So it sat in drafts, and it is still in drafts. And on the days when I am generous with myself, I think that not sending it was the single most decent thing I did that year. And on the other days, I think that if I had sent it and she had said yes, the pattern would have been undeniable, and maybe none of it would have happened to a 4th person. I genuinely do not know. I have made my peace with not knowing that too. There is a great deal of not knowing in this, and I have had to build somewhere to put it. The records came back on the 22nd of January, and they were 11 pages, and they were worse than I had let myself imagine, and also not what I expected at all. Gordon Feld had submitted the request to the vendor on the 11th of December, the same day he told me he had. He was telling the truth. I want that on the record because I spent 6 weeks half suspecting a man who turned out to be the only person in the entire process who did his job on time. The vendor acknowledged it on the 12th of December. And on the 19th of December, the vendor's compliance team wrote back to the district and said, in the flat prose of somebody who processes 40 of these a week, Detailed Message Metadata Device Identifier, IP, session is available under Tier 2 retention. This district's account is provisioned at Tier 1, which retains message content and timestamp for 90 days, but does not retain device or session metadata. Confirm whether you wish to proceed with the Tier 1 export. There it was. The device identifier, the thing that would show which phone in the world sent that message, did not exist. It had never existed. It was not deleted and it was not hidden. Our district had never paid for it. I sat at the kitchen table and put my face in my hands for a while. And then I read the next page. Because somebody at the district had replied on the 22nd of December, and the reply said, "Please hold pending internal discussion." And then nothing. For 4 weeks. No further correspondence in the entire production. Please hold. On the 22nd of December, with the 90-day window closing on the 2nd of February. I need to be fair here, and being fair is the hardest thing in this entire account. I do not know who wrote "please hold." The name was redacted, lawfully, as personnel information. I do not know what the internal discussion was. It is entirely possible that it was somebody sensible asking whether an export of a teacher's messages needed legal review first, which is a reasonable question that a district should ask. It is also possible it was somebody who did not want the answer. I will never know which, and I have made a kind of peace with never knowing, and I want to say clearly that I did not then and do not now accuse any individual of deliberately running the clock out. But here is what was true regardless of anybody's intentions. The Tier 1 export still existed. Message content and timestamp, 90 days. It would not tell anybody which device sent the message, but it would tell anybody who looked whether a message with that text existed in my account at 9:41 p.m. on the 4th of November at all. And on the 22nd of January, 11 days from expiry, nobody had asked for it. I called Bernice at 8 in the morning and read her the page, and she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Send me everything. I'm going to do something I don't normally do." What she did was write a letter. 1 page. To the superintendent, copied to the board's counsel, and it did not accuse anybody of anything, which I have now learned is the mark of every effective letter anybody sent on my behalf in my entire life. It said, "Our member is aware that platform records relevant to this matter are subject to a 90-day retention period expiring 2 February. We understand an export has been available since 19 December and has not been requested. We ask that the Tier 1 export be requested today and that this letter be placed in the investigation file." That last clause is the whole letter. Everything before it is furniture. Because from the moment that letter was in the file, every person who touched this matter had a document in front of them proving they had been told, in writing, on a specific date, that the evidence was about to disappear. Nobody wants to be the name attached to that. The export was requested that afternoon. It came back on the 28th of January, 5 days before the window closed. Bernice called me at 4:40 in the afternoon and said, "Are you sitting down?" And I said no, and she said, "Sit down." There was no message. Not a deleted message. Not a message that had been recalled. In my entire account history, across the whole of the 4th of November, there was no message to Beckett Ardaugh at all, at 9:41 p.m. or any other time. The last message I had sent that day was at 3:52 in the afternoon to a parent about a field trip permission slip. The screenshot was a picture of a thing that had never happened. I did not feel triumph. I have talked to other people who have been through versions of this, and they all say the same thing, and none of us were expecting it, and I still find it strange. What I felt was fury. Actual, physical, hands-shaking fury for the first time in 11 weeks. Because it had taken one query. One. A vendor's compliance team ran it in 6 days for a fee of $211, and the answer was absolute and unambiguous and had been sitting there, available from the 10th of November when I stood in Doug Petrosian's office and told him exactly where to look. 81 days. My daughter had stopped eating breakfast. A woman had turned her shopping cart around in an aisle. 11 people had privately told me they believed me and publicly said nothing. For 81 days, because nobody wanted to spend $211 to find out. Here is what I assumed would happen next, and I want to record my own naivety accurately. I assumed it was over. I assumed there would be a phone call and probably an apology, and that I would be back in my classroom within the week, and that the hard part now would be the awkwardness of walking back into a building where people had thought that about me. What actually happened is that the district went quiet for 9 days. And then Curtis Akonjo called and said that the investigator's report was being finalized, that the platform records were an important input, and that the district was considering next steps regarding the source of the image. The source of the image. So you're investigating who made it, I said. I can't discuss the specifics. Mr. Akonjo, a fabricated message about a teacher was circulated to 800 children. Somebody made it. That's not an HR matter, that's a MS Doherty. He stopped me, gently, and I heard something in his voice that I eventually came to recognize as genuine unhappiness. You are correct. I am not able to say more than I have said. And then, right at the end, in a completely different tone, he said, for what it's worth, and I should not say this, I'm sorry it took as long as it did. That was the first apology anybody offered me. It came from the HR director, off the record, in a sentence he prefaced by saying he should not say it. I got the investigator's report on the 11th of February through Bernice. 19 pages. It found the allegation unsubstantiated. It stated that platform records confirmed no such message existed in my account. It recommended my immediate return to duty. And on page 17, under additional observations, it said this. The investigator notes that the complainant, upon being informed of the platform findings, declined a follow-up interview. The investigator further notes that the complainant's son, B.A., in his interview of 8 December, provided an account of the origin of the image that the investigator was unable to corroborate, and which the complainant subsequently characterized as the product of the student's distress. I read it 4 times. The 8th of December. Beckett Ardaugh had told Gordon Feld something on the 8th of December, 9 weeks before the export came back, 9 weeks before anybody believed me. He had said something, and it had not been corroborated, and his mother had explained it away as a distressed child talking nonsense, and the investigation had moved on. I sat in my kitchen with 19 pages in my hands, and I thought about a boy in a small chair on the 4th of November, asking me whether there is a point where it is too late to say. The record's request was not the clean move I have made it sound like. It took 23 days, 1 denial and 1 appeal, and I nearly got it wrong twice. I filed it on the 7th of January. The statute gives 10 business days. On the 20th of January, the district responded, within the deadline, and denied it in part. The denial said that records relating to an ongoing personnel investigation are exempt from disclosure, and that the request as framed sought records that relate to an identifiable employee. I sat and read that denial 4 times, and I want to describe the specific feeling, because it is the feeling that stops most people. And if you take one practical thing from this account, let it be this paragraph. The feeling is, I have been told no by an institution, in writing, with a statute cited, and therefore the door is closed. That is what a denial is designed to produce. Not a lie. A correctly worded document that produces the feeling of a closed door. And the actual situation was that they had denied part of my request and granted none of it, and had not addressed at all the part about retention, tier pricing, and vendor correspondence, which is not personnel information by any reading, and which was the part I actually wanted. Bernice was busy. I did not call her. I sat at the kitchen table with the statute open in one tab and the denial in the other, and I did the thing I have done 400 times with an 8th grader who says I can't do this. I read the actual words, slowly, in order. The exemption covers records relating to an identifiable employee. An email from a vendor's compliance team about what a school district's contract tier retains does not relate to an identifiable employee. It relates to a contract. I sent the appeal the next morning. It was 5 sentences, and it was the best writing I have ever done. I did not argue that they were wrong. That is the mistake. I narrowed. I wrote, I accept the exemption as to any record identifying an employee. I am not requesting those. I am requesting 1 correspondence with the vendor regarding data retention tiers and pricing, 2 the district's current contracted retention tier, and 3 the dates on which any records requests were submitted to the vendor and acknowledged, with all names and identifying details redacted. Dates and a price. That is all I asked for. A date is not a person. They complied in 8 days. And that is how 11 pages arrived on the 22nd of January containing a vendor email dated the 19th of December, and a district reply dated the 22nd of December saying please hold pending internal discussion, with every name blacked out and every date perfectly intact. The redactions were lawful and thorough, and they did not matter at all, because I had not asked for the names. I have thought about this a great deal since. If I had demanded the names, I would still be arguing about the names, and the 90 days would have run out while I was being right. There is a thing that happened on the 24th of January that I have never told anybody, and that I am still not entirely comfortable about. The board president is a man called Ellis Marchand, who has been on that board for 11 years and who owns the feed store. I have known him distantly my whole life. His nephew was in my second period in 2016. I did not contact him. Bernice had been extremely clear that contacting a board member individually about an active matter was the single fastest way to convert myself from a wronged employee into a problem, and she was right, and I did not do it. What I did was go to the feed store on a Saturday morning to buy 40 pounds of sunflower seed for a bird feeder we do not own. I want to be honest about what that was. That was contacting him. I have since described it to myself in about 9 different ways, and all of them are ways of not saying the plain thing, which is that I engineered a chance encounter with a decision maker, and I knew exactly what I was doing while I was loading a bag of seed into a cart. He was at the register. He said, Francis, not unfriendly, careful. I said, Ellis. And then neither of us said anything for about 4 seconds, and I paid for 40 pounds of birdseed, and at the door, without turning round, I said the only thing I had planned, which was, the platform log expires on the 2nd of February. It's 90 days. After that, nobody can ever check. And I left. He did not answer. He did not say a word. I do not know to this day whether he did anything with it, or whether Bernice's letter 3 days later was the only thing that moved it, or whether Gordon Feld had already escalated it himself. The export was requested on the 28th, 4 days after the birdseed and 3 days after the letter. I will never know which, and I have deliberately never asked. Sam knows. He said, "Was that smart?" And I said, "No," and he said, "Did it work?" And I said, "I don't know," and he said, "Well then," and that was the entire conversation. The 11 days between the request and the answer were the worst of the 81, and I had genuinely not expected that. I had assumed that once the machinery was moving, I would feel better. I felt vastly worse, and the reason is obvious in retrospect. For 11 weeks, I had been able to tell myself that the problem was that nobody had looked. That is a bearable thought. There is a solution in it. Once they were looking, there was a new thought available, and it arrived at about 3 in the morning on the 31st of January, and it was, what if the record is wrong? Not what if I did it. I knew I had not done it. What if there is a message in there anyway? What if somebody with district-level access can post as an account? What if the platform has a bug? What if the export comes back and there is something in it, and I have spent 11 weeks demanding that everybody look at the one thing that destroys me? I got up and I went and sat on the bathroom floor with the door shut so I would not wake Sam at 3 in the morning, and I thought about that for about an hour. That is what 81 days does. By the end of it, I was, for 1 hour, on a bathroom floor, genuinely uncertain about a fact I had personal, direct, absolute knowledge of. I have never told Sam about that hour either. He's going to find out by hearing this, which is a strange way to tell your husband something, and I have decided to leave it in, because if I take it out then, this is an account of a woman who was steady the whole way through, and there was no such woman. And the next person this happens to should know that the bathroom floor at 3 in the morning is a normal part of it and not evidence of anything. I went back on the 17th of February, and it was the worst day of the entire thing, and nobody warns you about that either. Everybody was so kind. That is what made it unbearable. There was a card on my desk signed by 19 people. Somebody had watered my plants for 3 months. Doug Petrosian came and stood in my doorway and said, "Frankie, I'm glad you're back," and his eyes were wet, and he meant it entirely, and he was the man who would not let me get my own grade book. Both of those things are true, and I have had to learn to hold them. Fourth period came in at 11:05, and there were 26 13-year-olds who had spent 3 months with a substitute and a roomer, and they filed in and sat down and were completely, unnaturally silent. I had planned 11 different things to say. What I actually said was, "Okay. It didn't happen, it's been proven that it didn't happen, and I'm not going to talk about it again in this room. Open to page 204. And a boy in the 3rd row named Deshan said, "MS. Oh, we knew." And the entire class made a noise, a kind of collective exhale, and then somebody's binder fell on the floor and everybody laughed too loudly for too long, and that was the end of it, and we did an hour on plate tectonics. Beckett Ardaugh was not in that class. He had been withdrawn in January and was being homeschooled. The countermove came 10 days later, and it was in the newspaper. Not our little weekly. The regional paper, the one that covers 4 counties, which had never in 19 years run a story about our district. The headline was about a school board's handling of a parent complaint. The piece was 3/4 sympathetic to me, and I want to be honest that a version of me had wanted exactly this for 3 months. But there was a paragraph. There is always a paragraph. It said that the parent who raised the concern had declined to comment for the piece, and that a family representative had provided the following statement: that the family had acted in good faith on information available to them, that they remained concerned about the well-being of students in the district, and that they had made a formal request for the district to review the teacher's private communications with students over a multi-year period. A multi-year period. She had not retreated 1 inch. She had simply widened it. Because here is the thing about an allegation like this, and I did not understand it until that morning with a newspaper on my kitchen table. The specific claim was dead. The claim was proven false by a database query. But the atmosphere the claim created is not a claim, and you cannot run a query on an atmosphere, and Whitney Ardaugh understood that better than I did. She did not need anybody to believe the message was real anymore. She needed people to keep saying my name in the same sentence as the word investigation, for as long as possible, until it fused. Bernice's advice was to say nothing and let it die. She was not wrong. I want to be clear that in 80% of cases, she is completely right, and I have since told 2 other teachers to do exactly that. But there was a thing she did not have, which is that I had read page 17. I went to see Gordon Feld. He was retired, the contract was closed, he had no obligation to see me at all, and he saw me anyway at a coffee place off the highway on a Tuesday morning in March. I can't discuss the contents of the interviews, he said, before I had sat down. I know. I've read page 17, and I'm not going to ask you what he said. He waited. I want to ask you one thing that isn't about the contents, I said. On the 8th of December, a 13-year-old told you something that you couldn't corroborate. In your professional judgment over how many of these you've done, did that boy seem like a kid making things up because he was upset? Gordon Feld turned his cup around on the table twice. I've done this work for 11 years, he said. Before that, I was a middle school principal for 19. He looked up. MS. Doherty, I wrote that sentence on page 17 the way I wrote it very deliberately, and I chose every word in it, and there is nothing further I can tell you about it. Then he said, "How's your daughter?" "She's 11, and she stopped eating breakfast for a while." He nodded slowly, and he said, "My report recommended your immediate return, and I sent it the day I finished it. I want you to know I did not sit on anything." And then, standing up, putting money on the table for a coffee I had already paid for. "You should know that in my 11 years I have never once had a complainant decline a follow-up interview after an exoneration. Not once. That is not in my report because it isn't a finding. It's just a thing that has never happened before." I want to describe the next 3 weeks honestly, because it is the part I am least proud of. I became obsessed. Not with clearing my name, which was already done on paper, with Whitney Ardaugh. I read every public thing she had ever put her name to. She had run for the board in 2021 and lost by 91 votes. She chaired the boosters. She had a small business doing college admissions, consulting for families in 3 counties, which I had not known, and which suddenly explained an enormous amount about a woman for whom a child's 8th grade transcript was a professional matter as much as a maternal one. I found the 2022 complaint about a Deorah referenced in a set of board minutes. I made a timeline. It was 4 feet long, and it was on the back of a roll of wrapping paper on my dining room table, and I did not let Sam eat there for 11 days. And on a Thursday in the middle of March, Sam stood in the doorway of the dining room and said, "Frankie, come here a second." He took me into the living room where Ada was doing homework on the floor, and he said, quietly, "Ask her what she did at school today." I asked her. She said nothing. He said, "Ask her about the thing with the science fair." And my daughter looked up at me, and her face did something complicated, and she said, "It's fine, Mom, you're busy." She had been picked for the county science fair. She had found out on Monday. It was Thursday. I had not asked her a single question about her own life in 11 days, because I was building a 4-foot timeline of a woman who had already lost. I went and sat down on the floor next to my daughter and said, "Tell me everything," and she did, for 40 minutes. And that night after she was asleep, I took the timeline off the table and put it in the garage. Not in the bin. I am not going to pretend I threw it away. In the garage, on the shelf where I could get it. But off the table. I want to say something about my classes, because for 4 months I thought about what had been done to me, and almost never about what had been done to them. 26 kids a period, 5 periods, 128 8th graders. They had 4 substitutes in 81 days. The first lasted 9 days. The second was a retired shop teacher who was kind and did not know any science and showed documentaries. The third lasted 2 weeks. The fourth was a long-term who was actually competent and arrived in the 2nd week of January, by which point it was January. We do the physical science sequence in that quarter. Chemical reactions, then energy, then a 3-week lab block that I have been building since 2013, and which is genuinely the best thing I do all year. They did not do the lab block. You cannot hand a lab block to a substitute. The district will not authorize it, and quite reasonably. So 128 kids did worksheets and documentaries for a quarter of 8th grade science, and 11 of them were the kids who were going to find out that year whether they liked this, and some number of those 11 did not find out, and I have no way of ever knowing which ones or how many. That is a cost that appears in no report. It is not in Gordon Feld's 19 pages. It is not in the board policy. Nobody has ever mentioned it to me, and I have thought about it more than I have thought about the grocery store. When I came back on the 17th of February, a girl in my first period named Priya put her hand up and said, "Are we still doing the thing with the cars?" That is the lab block, the thing with the cars. I said yes. I compressed 9 weeks of curriculum into 6 to get it back in before the state test, and I did it badly, and it was worth it. The regional paper did not come from me. I want that in the record clearly because a number of people in this town believe otherwise, including, I am fairly certain, Ellis Marchand. A reporter called N. Namdi Akeby phoned my cell on the 24th of February, 6 days after I came back, and said he was working on a piece about how districts handle parent complaints, and that he had 2 sources in the district, and could I talk? I said no. He was good about it. He said he understood, and then he said the thing that reporters say, which is, I'm going to write this either way, and I would rather write it with your account than without it. That is not a threat. It is just true, and it is the most uncomfortable true thing anybody said to me that year. I called Bernice. She said do not talk to him, and then, after a pause, she said, but he's right that it runs anyway. I did not talk to him. The piece ran on the 27th with a line saying I had declined to comment through my union representative. And here is what I learned, and it genuinely surprised me. A piece that is 3/4 sympathetic to you, that you did not participate in, is not a victory. It is a loss of control that happens to be pointed in a helpful direction, and it feels almost exactly like the loss of control that happened in November. Somebody else was, once again, telling the town about me, and once again I found out what it said at the same time as everybody else, and once again I could not correct the part that was wrong. There was a sentence in it about a dispute over a grade that made it sound like I had been in a conflict with a family, which is not what happened, and there was nothing at all about a Deora, because the paper could not confirm the 2022 matter, and quite properly would not print it. I have thought since about whether I should have talked to him. I do not think so, but my reason has changed. In February, my reason was that Bernice told me not to. Now my reason is that talking to him would have made me a party to a story about a family, and there is a 13-year-old inside that family, and I did not know on the 24th of February what I found out on the 9th of April, and if I had given that interview, I would have said things that I would now have to live with. Sometimes being cautious for the wrong reason saves you anyway. I do not recommend it as a method. I told Ada on the 28th of January, the evening the export came back. She was 11. I had spent 81 days being extremely careful about how much she knew, which is a thing every parent in this situation does, and which I now think I got about 60% right. I sat on the end of her bed and said, the thing that people were saying about me, there's a record of it and they checked it and it proves it never happened, and it's finished. And my daughter, who had stopped eating breakfast, who had asked me in November whether confessing would make it stop, said, okay, does that mean people will say sorry? I said some of them, probably not most of them. She thought about that for a while, then she said that's stupid. Yes. Like they were wrong. They were. So why don't they have to say it? And I did not have a good answer for her then, and I do not have one now. I said something about how it is harder to admit you were wrong about a person than to be wrong about a person, and she looked at me with the flat, unimpressed expression of a child who knows an adult is patting, and said, yeah, but they should still have to. She is right. She was 11, and she was completely right, and every adult explanation I have constructed since is a more sophisticated version of no. 3 of the 11 apologized. I want to be accurate about the number. 2 did it well. My friend Kathleen, who had gone quiet in November, came to the house in March and sat at my kitchen table and said, I believed you the whole time and I said nothing and I have been sick about it. and she cried, and I did not comfort her, which I think was the right call and which was hard. The Sunday school teacher never said anything. We have passed each other in the aisle perhaps 40 times. The man in the truck outside the hardware store came into the school in April, at pickup, and stood in front of me and said, "I want to say I was out of line." And I said, "You were." And he nodded and left. And that is the entire exchange, and I think about it with something almost like fondness, because he is the only person in this whole account who did the thing immediately and without arranging his own feelings first. 8 of the 11 have never mentioned it. We are all perfectly friendly. I have been to 2 of their houses since. That is the actual arithmetic of a small town after something like this. 3 out of 11, and one of them was a man in a truck. Beckett Ardaugh came to my classroom on the 9th of April, after school, and he came alone, and he should not have been in the building. I heard the door and looked up, and he was standing in it, 6 feet tall now and gray-faced, in a hoodie, holding the strap of a backpack with both hands like a much younger child. Every single piece of training I have had in 14 years, fired at once. I said, "Beckett, stop there, don't come in." He stopped. "I need you to stand in the hallway right there, where you are. Leave the door open. I'm going to call the office and I'm going to ask Mrs. Benavides to come down here and then we can talk, all right? You're not in trouble. I just can't be in a room with you by myself." And he said, "I know. That's why I waited till there were people in the hall." Which broke my heart, because it meant he had thought about it, and it meant he had understood, at 13, what had happened to me well enough to plan around it. Rosalie came in 90 seconds. She stood by the door with her arms folded, and she did not say a word for the next 20 minutes, and she wrote down the time we started and the time we finished, because she has been doing this for 26 years, and she knew exactly what this was. He told it in the wrong order, the way people do when the thing has been inside them for 5 months. He said he had made it in about 11 minutes on a Tuesday night with an app and a screenshot of a real thread, and a font that matched. He said he had shown it to exactly one person, a friend called Micah, on the Wednesday, and that it had been a joke, and then he stopped and corrected himself out loud, unprompted, and said, "No, it wasn't a joke. I'm not going to say that. I made it because I was so angry." At me. And Beckett Ardaugh said no, at her. Here is what he told me, standing in a doorway with Rosalie Benavides 3 feet away, and I am putting it down as close to his words as I can because he deserves that. He said his mother had been on him about the magnet application since 6th grade. He said she had rewritten every essay he had ever submitted for anything. He said she talked about his transcript at dinner every night and that he had started to feel like a document. He said that after the conference in October, she came home and told his father that I was a problem and that she would handle it. He said that when he came to my after-school sessions, she asked him every time what I had said about the grade, and that when he said we mostly did the periodic table and talked about his drawings, she told him he was being used. And he said that on the 4th of November, the night he made it, they had a fight in the kitchen, and she told him that if he did not get into the magnet, he would be ordinary, and that she had not worked this hard to raise somebody ordinary. And I wanted something to be her fault, he said, for one time. He had made it so that his mother would find it. He had left his tablet open on the kitchen island. He had wanted her to see it and take it to the school and make a fool of herself, and then everyone would see her the way he saw her. Micah showed 6 people. By Monday morning it was everywhere. I couldn't stop it, Beckett said. It just went. I asked him one question. Rosalie told me afterward that it was the right one, and I still do not know. I said, "Beckett, did your mom find out it was you?" And he said, "Yeah." When? December 7th, the day before he told Gordon Feld. I told her, he said. I told her the whole thing in the car, and she pulled over. He was crying now in the doorway in a hoodie. And she said, "Okay." And then she said we're not going to talk about that again because nobody would believe it anyway, and it would ruin my life, and she wasn't going to let one mistake ruin my life. And the next day, you told the investigator. Yeah, and then she said I was overwhelmed and I didn't know what I was saying. He wiped his face on his sleeve, and then she took me out of school. I stood 11 feet from a child in my own classroom with my hands at my sides because I was not permitted to touch him, and I have never in 14 years wanted so badly to break a rule. Rosalie called the counselor before Beckett was out of the building. Then she called Doug. Then, because she has been doing this for 26 years and knows exactly what is legally required of her and exactly what is politically survivable, she wrote a 2-page contemporaneous account, timed and signed, and gave a copy to Doug and put a copy in her own file at home. I did not touch it. That was Bernice's instruction, and it was correct. And then, for 6 days, I had to decide what I actually wanted, and it was the only genuinely hard decision in this entire story. Because here is what I was holding. I had a 13-year-old's account, given voluntarily with an adult witness, that named his mother as having known since the 7th of December that the allegation was fabricated by her own son, and having chosen, for 5 months, to let a false accusation stand against a teacher rather than let her son face the consequences. There is a version of the next month where I hand that to a lawyer and to the regional paper and to the board. In that version, Whitney Ardaugh is finished in that town. It is not close. She loses the consulting business because no family within 4 counties sends their kid's application to a woman in that story. She probably loses more than that. And in that version, Beckett Ardaugh is the boy who made the fake message about his teacher. At 13, permanently, searchably, in a town of 19,000 people, in the newspaper forever. You do not get one without the other. There is no version where the mother is destroyed and the son is not, because the whole thing is a story about a boy and a screenshot, and the boy is the load-bearing wall. Sam said something on the 4th night that I did not want to hear. He said, "You know he's the only reason you got him at all." What does that mean? He didn't have to walk into that building. Sam was doing the dishes, not looking at me, which is how he says the hard things. He's 13 and he made a mistake that got completely out of his control, and his mother handed him a way out of it, and all he had to do was keep his mouth shut and go be homeschooled, and it would have faded. He walked into the building anyway. He turned the tap off. Frankie, that kid did the one thing every single adult in this thing wouldn't do. Doug wouldn't. The district wouldn't. The 11 people who texted you privately wouldn't. He dried his hands. He's the only person who told the truth out loud when it cost him something. And your plan is to make him famous for the worst thing he's ever done. I said she let it run for 5 months. She stood up in a gym and read it out. Yeah, Sam said. She did. And I want her hurt so badly I can taste it, and I'm telling you that as the person who watched you not sleep since November. He hung the towel up. But you're not going to be able to live in the version where you did that to him. I know you. You'd win it in April and you'd be paying for it in 10 years. The 6 days between Beckett standing in my doorway and my decision were the only days in the whole of it when I had actual power, and I want to describe what that was like, because it was not what I had spent 4 months imagining. For 81 days I had wanted leverage. That was the entire fantasy. Some object, some fact, some sentence that would make it stop and make somebody pay. And then on the 9th of April, I had it. I had more than I had ever imagined I would have. And I discovered that the thing about leverage is that the moment you have it, you become the person who is deciding what to do to somebody, and that is not a relief. It is the heaviest I have ever felt. I did not sleep well any of those 6 nights, and I had slept badly for 4 months, so I want to be precise. Those 6 were worse. Being wronged is exhausting. Deciding is worse. Bernice was the first call, and she was completely clear. You have 3 options, and I am going to describe all 3 without telling you which one to take, because this one is not legal advice. It is your life. Option 1, do nothing. The account sits in the district file. Whitney Ardaugh is finished institutionally in that district and nowhere else. Nobody outside the building ever knows. Option 2, give it to the district formally and ask them to act. They will not do much, Bernice said. There is no mechanism. They will note it, they will decline her from the volunteer roster, they will be slow returning her calls. It is real and it is invisible. Option 3, go public. The paper has an open file on this. Nnamdi Ape would take the call. And option 3, Bernice said, ends her. And I am obliged to tell you that it also puts a 13-year-old at the center of a regional news story about a fabricated sexual-adjacent allegation against his teacher, permanently, searchably. Francis, I have had 2 clients do a version of option 3. Both of them were right and both of them regretted it, and the regret was not about the adult. Rosalie was the second conversation, and she surprised me. I had assumed she would be the cautious one. 26 years in a front office makes people cautious. We sat in her car in the lot after school, which is where every honest conversation in a school building actually happens. I filed the report because I have to, she said. That is not me taking a side, that is the law and my job. But you asked me what I think, so. She turned in her seat. I think you should think about what that boy did when he walked into that building, Rosalie said. Because I have been doing this a long time and I have never seen it. Not once. Kids confess to me all day long, but they confess when they are caught. He was not caught. He was safe. His mother had built him a room and all he had to do was stay in it. I know. And he came out of it. She shook her head slowly. Frankie, that is the whole ball game right there. Whatever else that family is, that boy walked out of a safe room and told the truth to the person he had hurt, with a witness, on purpose, at 13. If we make that the thing that destroys him, then what exactly are we teaching every other kid who is sitting in a safe room right now? I sat in a Honda in a school parking lot and could not answer that. I am not telling you to protect her, Rosalie said. She does not deserve one thing from you, and I would not blame you for any of it. I am telling you that you cannot get her without him, and I think you know that, and I think that is why you have not slept. The third conversation was Adeora, and it is the one that decided it, and she did it by refusing to decide it for me. I laid it all out on the phone. The doorway, the 7th of December, the 3 options. And she was quiet for a long time, and then she said, You want me to tell you to burn it down? I don't know what I want. You do. You want me to say it because I lost my job and she is the reason, and if I say burn it down then you are doing it for me and not for you. Her voice was very steady. Francis, I am not going to give you that. Adeora. No, listen. A pause. Do you know what I would want if it were mine? I would want an apology. That is all. 4 years and what I want is a woman to say to me, I did that and it was not true and I knew. That is the only thing I actually want, and it is the one thing that is not available in any of your 3 options. She let that sit. Nothing you do to her gives me that, she said. Nothing you do to her gives you that either. So do not do it for me and do not tell yourself you are doing it for me. Whatever you choose, choose it for what it does to you and to that child, because those are the only 2 people your choice actually reaches. I decided on the 15th of April, sitting in the garage, which is where I go, on a bucket, with the 4-foot timeline on the shelf behind me and 40 of Beckett's drawings in a folder on the workbench. I took the folder down and went through them again. The gear ratio that is wrong on purpose. The linkage that cannot move. Machines designed so that when they fail it is not his fault. And I thought about a boy who built machines that were guaranteed to break. And who then, at 13, built one that worked once in a doorway on the 9th of April with a witness present, knowing exactly what it would cost him. That is the entire reason. It was not nobility and it was not forgiveness, and it was certainly not mercy toward Whitney Ardaugh, who I would still, on a bad day, quite like to see standing at that microphone. It was that I have spent 14 years telling 13-year-olds that it is never too late to say the true thing, and that the world is survivable, and one of them believed me and acted on it at real cost. And if the consequence of believing me was that his name went in a regional newspaper forever, then everything I say in that room every September is a lie. I went inside and told Sam and he said, okay. And then, after a minute, I'd have burned it down. I know. I'm glad you didn't, he said. Both of those are true. There is one more thing about those 6 days, and it is the least flattering, and I am including it, because I said at the start that this would be an account and not a performance. On the 4th night, I wrote the email to Nnamdi Ape. The whole thing. Names, dates, the 7th of December, the doorway, Rosalie's report. 9 paragraphs. It was the best argued thing I have ever written, and it was completely accurate, and every fact in it was true. I put his address in the to field. I sat with my finger over it for a long time, at about 2 in the morning, on the bathroom floor again, and what stopped me was not principle. What stopped me was that I imagined Beckett Ardaugh at 25, applying for something, and somebody in an office typing his name into a search box. That is it. That is the whole mechanism that stopped me, not ethics. A picture of a specific face at a specific imaginary desk, 11 years from now. I deleted the email. Then I emptied the deleted folder because I know myself, and I knew that if it existed anywhere I would come back to it in a bad week in July. And I want to say clearly, for anybody who reads this and is in their own version of the 6 days, I do not think I am a good person for that. I think I got extremely lucky that the picture that arrived in my head at 2 in the morning was his face and not hers. If it had arrived the other way round, I would have sent it, and I would have been entitled to send it, and I would be telling you a different story now with a worse ending in it that I would not be able to hear. What I had not accounted for is that it was not entirely mine to decide. Rosalie Benavides had filed a report. Doug Petrosian had received it. There is a legal architecture around a disclosure like that involving a student, and it does not pause while a teacher works out her feelings in her kitchen. Bernice explained it to me on the phone, and I could hear that she was pleased. "You keep talking about what you're going to do with this," she said. "You need to understand that the district is now in possession of a signed contemporaneous account from a 26-year employee that a parent knowingly permitted a false allegation to stand against a member of staff for 5 months. That is not your document. It is theirs, and they have to do something with it." "Do what?" "That's the interesting part," Bernice said. "Legally, very little. There's no statute for it. But institutionally," I heard her turn a page. "Francis, that district spent 3 months and an investigator and a great deal of goodwill on a thing that was false, and they are now holding a piece of paper explaining exactly how much of their own time was wasted, and by whom. Districts do not forget that. They do not act on it dramatically. They just stop returning somebody's calls." I met Whitney Ardaugh on the 22nd of April in the parking lot of a garden center, because she chose the place, and because I did not want to be alone in a room with her either. I had asked for the meeting. Bernice advised against it in writing, which she does when she wants a paper trail showing that a thing was her client's idea. Sam sat in our car 40 feet away with the engine off. She looked exactly the same. That is one of those details that does not fit the shape of a story and is nevertheless what happened. 3 months of this, and Whitney Ardaugh looked rested. "I agreed to this," she said, "because I want to say something to you directly. I never intended for it to go this far." Beckett came to my classroom. Something moved behind her face and was gone. "He shouldn't have done that. He told me you found out on the 7th of December. My son," Whitney Ardaugh said, "has been under a great deal of pressure and has said a number of things this year that are not accurate." And there it was, not a denial, a frame, delivered calmly in a garden center parking lot by a woman who had thought about how she would say it. I want to tell you that I stayed level. I did not entirely. "He's 13, I said. "He made a fake message because he wanted you to be wrong about something for one time in his life, and it got away from him, and he has been drowning in it since November. And on the 7th of December he told you, and you told him nobody would believe him. You've been talking to my son about our family. Your son walked into a school he doesn't attend and asked for a witness to be present because he understood what he'd done to me. My voice was not steady, and I let it not be. He is a better person than either of us, and he learned it somewhere, and it was not from what you did in December." Then I said the thing I had come to say, and it took about 90 seconds, and I had written it out 11 times at my kitchen table. I said, "I am not going to the paper. I am not going to name your son. There is no version of this where I put a 13-year-old's worst night on the internet forever, and if you know one single true thing about me from 14 years in that building, know that." I said, "But I am not protecting you. Those are different, and I want you to understand the difference." I said, "There is a signed account in a district file. Every administrator in that building has read it. Every one of them will read it again the next time your name appears on an agenda, or a request, or a complaint about any teacher in that district for as long as you live in this town. I did not put it there. Rosalie put it there because it is her job, and it is not coming out. And I said, I am going to speak at the May board meeting about what happened to me. I will not say your name because I do not have to. There were 400 people in that gym in November, and every one of them knows exactly whose name goes in the gap. Whitney Arda looked at me for a long moment. You've thought about this, she said. For 5 months. And what do you want from me? That was the question I had been waiting for, and I had an answer ready. And standing there in a parking lot, I found that the answer I had prepared was not the one I wanted anymore. What I had planned to say was, I want you to stand up at the same microphone and withdraw it. What I actually said was, I want you to get your son some help. He is not okay, and he has not been okay since September, and none of this is the reason. It is the symptom. She said, don't. He is 13, and he told me he feels like a document. Don't you dare tell me about my son. I taught him for 2 months, and I have thought about him every day since November, I said. And you took him out of school and put him in a house with the person he is most frightened of disappointing, and told him not to talk about the worst thing he's ever done, and you have his college applications on a spreadsheet. She was walking away before I finished. She got into her car. She did not slam the door because she is not a person who slams doors, and she pulled out of a garden center parking lot at completely legal speed. I spoke at the May meeting. I want to tell you that it was a triumph. It was not. It was 4 minutes in a gymnasium that smelled like floor wax at 7:20 on a Tuesday to a board of 7 people and about 60 parents, which is a big crowd for us and is not a big crowd. I had 4 minutes because that is what the sign-up sheet gives you. Whitney Ardahl was not there. I did not expect her to be. I did not do anything clever. I said that on the 10th of November I was placed on leave over a message that a database query showed had never existed. I said the query took 6 days and cost $211 and was not requested until the 28th of January. I said that our district is provisioned at a retention tier that does not keep device information, so that if a message ever is sent from a compromised account, we will never be able to prove which device sent it, and that the upgrade cost is in the vendor's own pricing sheet and is less than we spend on gym mats. I said that during those 81 days, my 11-year-old stopped eating breakfast. And then I said the only part I had rehearsed. I said, I am not asking this board to apologize to me. I am asking you to write a rule that when an allegation against an employee turns on a record that has an expiry date, the record gets pulled first, before anything else, within 5 business days. Not because of what happened to me, because the next person it happens to might not be the building technology liaison and might not know the record exists at all and will lose 81 days and a great deal more than that, and none of you will ever find out. Then my 4 minutes were up, and the board president said, "Thank you for your comments," and they moved on to a bid for gymnasium roof repair. I sat down. Sam took my hand. Rosalie Benavides, 3 rows back, in a gym she does not have to attend, made a small noise that she later denied making. The policy passed in August. It is 4 sentences long, and it is buried in Section 9 of the district's employee investigation procedure, and nobody outside that building will ever read it. It says that where an allegation concerns electronic communications, the district shall request the relevant platform records within 5 business days of receiving the allegation, and shall document the date of the request in the investigation file. 5 business days. 81 days versus 5. That is what I got. That is the entire material outcome of the worst year of my life, and I would not trade it, and I am aware of how that sounds. The retention tier was upgraded in the same board packet, in the consent agenda, as a line item of $1,100 a year, approved without discussion along with a bus contract and a bid for gym mats. $1,100 a year. I did the arithmetic once and then made myself stop. Whitney Ardahl moved in the following March. Not far, 2 towns over into a bigger house in a district where nobody knew any of it. Her business has a new website with a new photograph. She still does college consulting. She is, as far as I know, doing perfectly well. I want to be honest about how that sits, because the tidy version of this story would have her destroyed, and I have read enough of these to know that is what people want. She was not destroyed. Nothing happened to her. She was never named in the newspaper, never charged with anything, never publicly corrected. She read a fabricated message out loud in a gymnasium and let it stand for 5 months after she knew, and the total consequence to her life was that she sold a house at a profit. For about a year, I found that unbearable. It sat in my chest like a swallowed stone. What changed? It was not forgiveness, and it was not time. It was a conversation with Adeora N. Duckwey, who I now speak to about once a month, and who said something on the phone in the second summer that rearranged it. I said some version of, she got away with it completely. And Adeora said, Francis, she has to go and be that in a new town now, with the same son. She didn't escape anything. She just moved it. Beckett. I have thought harder about how to write this part than about any other part, because he is a real kid, and he is 19 now, and none of this is mine to spend. So I will say only this, and only the outside of it. He was not homeschooled the following year. He went to the high school 2 towns over. I know because Rosalie knows everything, and because I asked once, exactly once, and then stopped asking. In the November after all of it, 11 months to the week, an envelope came to the school with my name on it and no return address, and inside was a single sheet of drawing paper with one of his mechanical drawings on it. A machine that does not exist. Extremely precise, tiny lines, the kind of thing he used to do in the margins of a worksheet on the periodic table. There was no note, not a word, just the drawing. I have it framed in my classroom, on the wall by the door where the window is, and every year some kid asks me what it is, and I say it is a machine that does not exist, made by a student, and they say cool, and we get on with the lesson. That is the entire thing. That is all there has ever been, and I do not expect any more, and I would not want any more, because he does not owe me a relationship. He owed me the truth, and he paid that in full in a doorway at 13, when every adult in the situation had already decided not to. Doug Petrosian and I are all right, which surprised me. It took 2 years. For about 18 months, we were extremely polite to each other, which is the worst thing 2 people who used to be friends can be. Then in the second spring, he came into my room after school and sat down in one of the small chairs, which is a hard thing for a man of his size to do, and said, I've been trying to work out how to say this since February of the wrong year. He said he had believed me the entire time, from the first hour. He said he had also been told by district council that he was not to conduct his own inquiry, not to discuss the substance, and not to take any action that could be characterized as prejudging. And he said, and I hid behind that, because it was true, and because it was easier, and because if I'd walked you back to your classroom for your grade book and it had turned out different, I'd have been the principal who did that. I said, I know. That's not an excuse, Frankie. I know that too, I said. But I've spent 2 years thinking about the 11 people who texted me privately and didn't say anything out loud, and I've had to make my peace with the fact that I don't know for certain what I'd have done in 2019 if it had been you. He thought about that for a while. I'd like to think you'd have said something, he said. So would I said. That's not the same as knowing. Ada is 14 now. She eats breakfast. She has forgotten most of it, or she has done the thing children do where they file it somewhere and take it out at 25 with a therapist, and I will find out which in about a decade. But there is one thing. Last spring, a girl in her year had something said about her online, a stupid, ugly thing that got around 111 phones in a night. And my daughter, who is not a brave kid in the way people mean when they say brave, who does not like being looked at, stood up in a school hallway and said out loud, to a group of people she has to see every day for the next 4 years, that's not true, and you all know it's not true. She told me about it that night in about 9 words, embarrassed, and then changed the subject. I went into the bathroom and ran the tap and cried for a while. Because that is the only real thing I got. not the policy, not the 4 minutes. My daughter watched what happens when 11 people believe you privately, and she watched it at 11 years old, from the inside, and she drew a conclusion from it, and she acted on the conclusion in a hallway when it cost her something. There is no version of the last few years where I would choose to teach her that lesson that way. But she learned it, and it is in her now, and it is going to be in her at 40. In the second October after it, a woman came and stood in my doorway at 3:20 in the afternoon, and I knew what it was before she said a word. Her name is Tamsin Croft. She was 26 and in her second year, 6th grade language arts, in the classroom 2 doors down from mine. She had a parent complaint. She had been told about it that morning, and she had taught 4 periods afterward with it sitting in her chest, which is a thing I know the exact weight of. She stood in my doorway and said, "Can I ask you something?" and then could not. I said, "Come in, sit down, leave the door open." She sat in one of the small chairs and cried for about 90 seconds and apologized for crying twice. And I said the only genuinely useful thing I know about that, which is that everybody cries at this part, and it means nothing about whether you did anything. Then she told me it was a nothing complaint. A parent had said she had singled out a child in front of the class over a late assignment. It was not true in the way it was being told. It was 3/4 of a true thing with the shape changed. And I want to tell you what I said, because it is the entire distillation of everything I paid for, and it took 4 minutes, and I have now said it to 2 other people since. I said, "Write down everything you remember about that lesson, right now, tonight, before it gets edited. Not for anybody else. For you. Date it. Because in 6 weeks you will have told the story 11 times and you will no longer be able to find the original, and there is a version of you in 6 weeks who will need to know what the 26-year-old actually remembered on the first day." I said, "Find out what the record is. Every version of this has one. Is there a seating chart? A camera in the hallway? A class message log? A kid's assignment timestamp? Find out today what exists and find out how long it exists for and write that date down too. Everything in a school has an expiry, and no one will tell you what it is, and no one will check it for you." I said, "Tell people. More people than feels dignified. I told 11 and I should have told 40. The shame will tell you to be quiet and the quiet will be read as an admission, and by the time you understand that, 3 months will have gone." I said, "Do not be reasonable." I saw her flinch at that one because she is a reasonable person, and so am I, and it is the hardest of them. I said, "Reasonable people wait for the process, and the process is not built to find out what happened. The process is built to produce a document that lets the institution stop thinking about you. If you wait politely, you will get the document that costs them the least, and it will have the word unsubstantiated in it, and unsubstantiated is not did not happen, and you will carry the difference for the rest of your career." And then I said the last one, which is the one she wrote down. I said, "Ask, in writing, on day 1, what specific record would settle this, and ask them to preserve it. Not to review it, preserve it. Because the moment that request exists in a file, every person who touches your case knows that somebody knew, and knew when, and after that, nobody is willing to let it quietly expire." Tamsin's thing was over in 11 days. There was a hallway camera. It did not show sound, but it showed the room's doorway, and it showed that the child in question had left the room before the moment the parent described by 4 minutes, which meant the described event could not have occurred in the way it was described. 11 days. Her principal, who is Doug, requested the footage on the second day, which is the day after Tamsin wrote her letter asking for preservation, which is the letter I helped her write at my desk with the door open at 4:40 in the afternoon. Doug requested it on day 2. I have thought about that a great deal. I do not think he did it because he learned something from what happened to me, or not only that. I think he did it because there is now a 4-sentence policy in Section 9 of the Employee Investigation Procedure that says he has to, within 5 business days, and because a policy is a thing a frightened administrator can point at. That is what a policy is for. It is not a moral instrument. It is a permission slip for people who want to do the right thing and need cover to do it. 81 days for me, 11 for her, and 9 of those with a vendor. She came back the following week with a coffee she had bought me, which I did not want and drank anyway, and she said, "I don't know how to thank you." And I said what Adeora said to me on New Year's Day in the second year, when I tried to thank her. I said, "You do not thank me. You do it for the next one. There will be a next one. She will be 26 and she will stand in your doorway at 3:20 in the afternoon and she will not be able to finish her sentence, and you will already know what she is going to say, and you will tell her to sit down and leave the door open." And Tamsin Croft said, "That's a horrible thing to promise." "Yes," I said, "it is. There is a thing I have not said yet, and it belongs here. I am not, at the end of all of this, less trusting. That is what everybody assumes, and it is what I assumed would happen to me, and it did not. What changed is much narrower and much stranger. I no longer believe that being known protects you. That is the belief I actually lost, and I did not know I had it until it went. I had lived in that town for 38 years. I had taught 400 families. I had been to the funerals. I genuinely believed, without ever once having examined it, that all of that accumulated knowing constituted a kind of structure that would hold if anything ever came for me. It did not hold. It was not even load-bearing. 14 years and a Sunday school teacher and a woman I have known since I was 9, and 11 people who believed me in private, and the whole of it did not shorten one day of 81. What held was a database in another state that did not know my name. I am not bitter about that anymore, though I was for about a year. It is simply a fact about how the world is built, and I would rather know it than not, and I would rather my daughter learn it at 11 from the inside than at 40 from a stranger. People will like you. That is lovely, and it is worth having, and it is not a defense. Records are a defense. Find out where they are. I am still in that classroom, room 214, 8th grade science. People assumed I would leave. 2 districts called me in the year afterward, and one of them was a better job with a shorter drive and $8,000 more, and I sat in my car outside their central office after the interview and did not go back in. I have thought a lot about why. Some of it is stubbornness, and I am not going to dress that up. There was a real and not very attractive part of me that wanted to be visible in that town, at the grocery store, in the same aisle, indefinitely, so that the woman who turned her cart around would have to keep deciding every few weeks for years whether to say something. She never has. We have passed each other perhaps 40 times. She looks at the shelf. But the larger part is that I did not want the ending where the accused woman moves away. That is the ending everybody expects. It is so expected that it functions as a kind of confession, and I was not going to hand anybody that. So I stayed, and I am the building technology liaison, and I still get $400 for it, and I still write the acceptable use guidance, and there is now a paragraph in it, which I wrote, about how to preserve a record when an allegation is made. Nobody has ever needed it. That is the correct outcome, and it is a strange thing to be proud of, a paragraph that has never been used. Here is what I actually learned, and it is not what I expected to learn. I thought this was a story about being believed. For about 3 months, everything in me was organized around one question: how do I make these people believe me? That was the wrong question, and it nearly destroyed me, because it made every conversation a performance, and the more sincerely I performed, the more it looked like performance. The thing that saved me was not being believed. It was a database query that cost $211. The truth did not come out because I was a good person, or because people who knew me for 20 years stood up, or because the system worked. It came out because a record existed, in a data center in another state, with a 90-day timer on it, and because I happened to be the one person in that building who knew it existed and knew when it would expire. If I had taught English instead of science, if I had not taken a $400 stipend in 2019 because I needed a car payment, that message is still real to some people in this town. That is the part that keeps me up now, not what happened to me, that I got out because of a coincidence. Adeora did not teach the tech class. There was no record in her case, nothing to query, nothing with a timer. Same accuser, same architecture, 4 years earlier, and she lost her career, and the only difference between us is which stipend we happen to take in 2019. So if there is a thing I want to leave you with, it is not be strong or the truth wins. The truth does not win. The truth sits in a server in another state with an expiry date on it, and somebody has to know it is there, and somebody has to ask for it before the timer runs out. And if nobody does, then what happened simply stops having happened. Find out where the record is, before you need it, whatever your version of it is, whatever room you are in. And when somebody tells you they did not do it, and you believe them, and you send them a private message saying so, and you feel better afterward for having said something, say it out loud instead. Say it where it costs you. 11 people believed me in November. Every one of them was kind, and every one of them was decent, and every one of them told me in private, and the total effect of 11 decent people being privately certain of my innocence was precisely nothing. It did not shorten one single day of the 81. Every year now, on the first day, I do a thing that takes 4 minutes. I tell my new 8th graders that there is a machine on the wall by the door that does not exist, made by a student. And then I tell them, without any names and without any of the details, that a few years ago somebody made up something about me, and it went round this school in 90 minutes, and it took 81 days to prove it was not true, and that during those 81 days, a great many adults who liked me said nothing. They go completely silent. They always do. 13-year-olds understand this material better than anybody. And then I ask them one question, which is the only genuinely useful thing I have to teach them, and it is not on the state test. I ask, if you had seen it that Monday morning on your phone at the bus stop, with everybody else laughing, what would you actually have done? Not what should you do, what would you have done? They sit with it. Some of them lie, and I let them. A few of them do not, and every year at least one kid says, quietly, honestly, I'd have sent it to somebody. And I say, yes, of course you would. That is the true answer, and I am glad you said it out loud. That is where we start. Not with the version of ourselves who does the brave thing in the hallway, with the one who forwards it at the bus stop, because that is who most of us actually are at 7:40 in the morning with a phone in our hand. You cannot get to the other one without first admitting you are that one. That is the whole lesson. It takes 4 minutes. It turns out 4 minutes is enough to destroy somebody, and it is also, if you use it right, enough to start building the thing that stops it happening to the next one.